I'm Corbett Wall with DV Auction, here with your feeder flash for Friday, November the 11th, Veterans Day. Hug a veteran, or tell them you appreciate the service that they put in, but don't forget to recognize Veterans Day. Brought to you in part by Noromycin by Norbrook. Noromycin 300 LA is an effective and economical antibiotic. It's your go-to treatment for a wide range of cattle diseases and infections. I told you guys, if you were listening a couple of weeks ago, we bought a bottle of Noromycin 300 LA, a big jug of it, 500 milliliters, for just under $100. Treated 50 head of just under 5 weights calves that were on the cow that were looking a little droopy due to the weather change. Their back end was a little bit loose. We treated 50 head of them and had enough to treat an overpriced show pig right after that, all for less than $100. The next day, you know, they look brand new. So for more information on Noromycin 300 LA, go to norbrook.com. Mexico is suddenly finicky. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but there's been a presidential decree that seeks to ban genetically modified corn by 2024. Even that's imported from private entities, not just for the government. But you know, Mexico has been a big importer of our yellow corn, typically about 17 million metric tons of it. And now all of a sudden they're saying that they won't take our yellow corn anymore. And you think, well, how are they going to make all those tortillas? Well, that's typically done with white corn, and that's usually GMO free. But your yellow corn is what they use for livestock feeds, industrial type foods, things like that. But now all of a sudden they don't want to take that, and we're not exactly sure if it's just that or if it's maybe some conflicts that they have about some other things, including energy, maybe even the border crisis. We're not sure. But those people that are coming up from the border and illegally crossing into our country, does it look like they're that finicky about what they eat? Whether the meat that they eat and the livestock that they slaughter down there, they don't want them to have any genetically modified feeds given to them. You know, it kind of reminds me of a story. I remember many years ago, back when we had a problem with BSE, and they found a hot cow or two, and all of a sudden South Korea, no more American beef. And I was talking to an older friend of mine that had been in the Korean War, and he told me, well, it's funny, when I was over there, the Koreans that I saw would be more than happy to eat cow shit, let alone worried about that. But, you know, I think it has more to do than just with that. But it has sent your corn market down pretty good. Not that it didn't have a long ways that it could go down. But still, you know, it could give a little bit of relief to our cattle feeders. It sparked the board on feeder cattle quite a bit on Thursday. So we're interested to see that because feed costs and the lack of forage continues to be the biggest issue when you're talking about feeder cattle and calf markets. Not that it's not always a big issue. Of course, we've got a lot of issues, other input costs, fuel, and everything that goes in to growing and producing feeder cattle and calves. But these feed costs right now, it's got people backpedaling pretty good. Of course, we're at a pretty good price on fat cattle, even though they're not able to gain any more ground like they should be. But some of these cattle that they're buying, especially these yearling cattle that are in short supplies, they don't pencil out very well. And even if you hedge them, you can't cover yourself. You're betting on the come, like always, but more than usual. We see these big prices that I give you every day here on the Feeder Flash, and I'm going to give you some big ones again here today. And mostly that's being done by smaller independent feeders and mostly farmer feeders that are feeding their own grain. Of course, the opportunity cost of that is they could sell that grain. Most of them don't like to sell it. They like to walk it to town, or a good portion of it. If you plumb straight out sell it, you're going to have to pay taxes on that, and then that really goes against their grain. But still, you know, if they're walking that to town or feeding it to livestock and then sending it to town, you still got to figure your opportunity cost of that. And I know that a lot of farmer feeders lie to themselves about how cheap they're putting the pounds on, because that corn is worth so much money. I don't care if you own it and decide not to sell it. You still got to figure out what the cost of it is, and these cost of gains are way up there, guys. 150 and plus, and most of these cattle don't pencil out very well. You know, if you've got any forage, which forage has been short because we were so dry in so many areas in midsummer. We've had some moisture here in the last few weeks. We've been talking about where there is going to be some wheat pasture in areas. You know, the guys are wanting, the cheapest I've heard is $1 a pound on the game. We've never seen it that high. Well, your pounds of gain are worth a lot more than that, but still that's pretty darn high. And everything is just costing more to produce cattle, grow cattle, and especially finished cattle. But let's talk about your board on Thursday. December live cattle futures were up $1.50 at 153.07. February was up 87 cents at 155.02. It's kind of nice to see some gains there. Back months on live cattle up 70 to up 92 cents. Feeder cattle for November up 90 at 178.62. That makes sense since corn was cheaper. January up 205 at 181.70. That was a big gain, and your back months were all big gainers from up $1.10 to up $2 smooth. Corn was down a little bit, been off a little bit most of the week here, but on Thursday down 11.25 cents a bushel, ending regular trading at 6.53 1/4. Beans down 29.25 cents at 14.30 1/2. Fat cattle trade, we continued to see the market that we established on Wednesday, where, you know, we traded at steady prices despite tight supplies of market-ready cattle and excellent demand, not only for our beef globally and domestically, but also for our cattle, especially the high-grading cattle. Packers are in desperate need for them, but they continue to get by on captive supplies. They pull contracts. They're doing everything they can to go as long as they can without raising the market. And every week they seem to get the first few guys to pull the plug at steady prices, and then everybody else has to fall in behind. And the guys that priced their cattle higher and thought they had their boots stuck in the ground and weren't going to accept steady or lower bids, they end up having to fall in if they want to do it. The heck of it is, guys, if you keep those cattle, they're going to be better grading cattle next week or the next or the next. I realize it's costing a lot to feed them, and that's one reason they're getting guys to puke the cattle, because it's costing so much to feed the cattle. And especially when you get late in the stages there where the cattle are not very efficient whenever they get very close to being done, and that's actually helping your packers get those cattle bought without having to raise the market. But Colorado didn't show anything due to confidentiality. Iowa had 5,300 head confirmed on Thursday, 21,200 head for the week, which is pretty decent for them, but probably see a little bit more trade come out either Thursday late that they didn't get put in, or on Friday. But 152 to 155 live price, we had that last week. Did see a little bit more 154 and 155 in Iowa and places in eastern Nebraska. So We're going to have a higher weighted average for this week than we did a week ago. Not a lot, but I think it will be some higher. Dress price paid in Iowa was $242. Nebraska, 5,300 head, also confirmed there on Thursday. 22,900 head for the week, which is quite a few, but they'll have a little bit more than that. Live prices paid in Nebraska on Thursday confirmed 152 to 153 and a half. But like I said, I heard of some 154 and 155 on well-finished cattle in Nebraska, and that'll show up here as we wind everything up for the week. I did hear from Feeder Flash Gang member, but been having a hard time getting fat cattle marketed in extreme western Nebraska, out there in the panhandle of Nebraska, if you will. There's not a very good handle there, but that's kind of what you call them. But said they haven't been able to market very many cattle out there, even on this higher market and tight supplies. But packers finally came in on Thursday, bought cattle in western Nebraska, would go ahead and buy them cash because that's the way the guys wanted to sell them. And they bought them mostly at 153. So they were very happy about that, getting those cattle sold. A lot of those cattle were sold with help from consolidated beef producers. And if you're having trouble getting your cattle marketed and you want to sell them cash, or if you want to sell them negotiated grid, however you want to sell them, contact consolidated beef producers based here in Canyon, Texas, and they will assist you in that. Talk about Kansas trade, only 300 head confirmed on Thursday. About 9,000 head for the week. One price of $1.50 there. Texas, about 1,500 head on Thursday. 8,400 head for the week. And live prices from 149 to 150 and a quarter. That 149 would have been Mexican origin or something off the market, and it would have been mostly 150 like they all traded on Wednesday. Box beef cutout values were mixed. And we narrowed up the choice select spread quite a bit. Choice cuts down 140 at 263.27. Selects were up 160 at 236.83. So that choice select spread that's been running over $30 on Thursday afternoon was $26.44. Your slaughter, a little bit lighter than last week, but not a lot. 510,000 harvested up through Thursday. That's just 3,000 less than last week and 17,000 more than the same week a year ago. Talk about what else is going on real quick. Next week, Nevada livestock marketing that I talk about quite a bit in Fallon, Nevada. My good friends Jack and Rachel Payne own and operate that market there, and I go out and help them on their monthly feeder cattle specials this time of year. They've got a big one for next week, next Friday, November the 18th. Not today, but a week from today, November the 18th, and it's going to run over into the 19th. Looking like they're going to have about 8,000 head of cattle or more. A lot of cattle coming off those grazing permits, cattle coming off of elevation. Cattle are moving right now, and they're going to have a lot of them, a lot of big fancy consignments, and just a lot of cattle for a stockyard that sits in town in Fallon, Nevada, and is pretty tight with maybe 4,500 cattle. To have 8,000, that pressures them. Now they do have the use of some feeding facilities not far from town, and they jockey those cattle around and do a good job and get sold cattle moved out so they can have more come in. But you can go on to dvauction.com, view and bid that sale next Friday at Nevada Livestock Marketing. Let's talk about your feeder cattle market. Your real-time index on DV Auction late in the day on Thursday, sitting at 173.62, down 63 cents, and your market's just been a little bit weaker here for the last couple of weeks, really, especially on calves, and especially in the northern plains on calves, and because of those issues we talked about earlier with your feed costs and lack of forage. But talk about your big sales on Thursday. Farmers and Ranchers Livestock in Salina, Kansas had about 2,850 head of feeder cattle on Thursday. Feeder steers were $2 to $4 lower. Feeder heifers were mixed from $2 lower to $2 higher, but did see some replacement heifers out of Salina, Kansas. 66 head of them weighed 805 at 170. Pratt, Kansas, Winter Livestock in Pratt, 2,800 head there. They called the calves $3 to $8 lower. I think that was probably that's kind of the way the calves have been selling here of late. So just a little bit easier market there. Mitchell Livestock Marketing in Mitchell, South Dakota had around 3,000 head. They called the market for the most part steady to firm. What they really featured in Mitchell on Thursday was big steers, or warmed up steers, ready to be finished out, but selling heavier than what's typical, but it is typical for that part of South Dakota. Guys will background their cattle to a pretty good weight, but it doesn't take a lot of time to finish them out. But steers weighing over 1,000 pounds, from 1,000 up to 1,150 pounds, they had 827 head of them. They averaged, all those averaged 1,060 pounds with a weighted average price of $166.69, which I thought was pretty darn impressive there, guys. How about your Zoetis stick-out sale of the day? And it was Lamona Livestock Auction in Lamona, Iowa. That's southern Iowa. They had a really good sale. I talked to several Feeder Flash Gang members that attend that sale regularly. It is owned and operated by a couple of friends of mine, Jason Allen and Jared Miller, and they're young guys, and they do a really good job there. And it's just a nice market there. And I thought they really needed some love because I'd heard from several guys talking about how high some of the quotes were, and I got several of the quotes come out of there. I don't get their information in the Cattle Market Central. Maybe someday we will, whenever we get loose from or upgrade our clerking system there. But we had some very impressive feeder cattle quotes on both steers and heifers, and it looked like the calves were selling pretty good too. But their friendly neighborhood Federal State Market reporters showed up to the sale and called the calves $4.50 to $23 lower. Well, that's a fine how do you do. And I tell you what, I know I'm very critical of these market reporters, but I was a market reporter and trained market reporters for 20 years. And now I'm depending on that information at times to help me with these market reports and to help you guys and get the information out. And when you've got somebody that does something that foolish, and I thought that maybe it was a typo, but found out that no, it wasn't. He thought the market was $4.50 to $23 lower. Give me a break. They sold 56 head of 497 pound steers, same as 500 pounds, for $228. That's about as high as they've sold them anywhere in the country, even up in in western South Dakota, Montana, places like that. They don't sell a hell of a lot higher than that. Maybe $2 or $3 at the most. But that was a big load of calves there. He's calling the market on onesie twosies and stuff like that because it's lack of training. And if they're not taking their job seriously, why are they even doing it? It's ridiculous. I always took pride in the markets that I covered and the people that I trained to cover the markets, and they took pride in it too. But it's a lost art, absolutely. They sold 117 head of steers, weighed 708 at 197. My goodness. Now, the market reporter called those cattle fancy. Talked to several of the guys there, said they were not fancy. In fact, they was a little hard looking because they were so green. They'd been turned out all summer, been out of grass. They were green. They were ready to go to feed. It was they could have called them thin or green or anything, but they called them fancy. That is not the way you report that market. But they sold on their condition because they've been turned out for so long. I'm sure the grass had gotten short. Those cattle were just hide hair and running gears, but that's not fancy. They sold 89 head of heifers, weighed 616 pounds at 182. My goodness, wow. And at a really good market at Lamona, Iowa, there in that southern Iowa. How about a couple individual quotes? Bluegrass Stockyard South in Stanford, Kentucky. Now you think, well, they're not going to sell cattle high anymore because they don't have the hair to go north to feed in the cold weather. But, you know, the market hadn't fallen off that much for them, guys. In Stanford, they sold 61 head of steers, weighed 848 at 173.85. And those cattle got a lot of freight on them to get them somewhere that they will feed. But the best quote that I saw anywhere on Thursday, your Mackerson, no BS, top quote for the day, come out of Columbus Sales Pavilion in Columbus, Nebraska, was 95 steers, weighed 987. That's scaring the hell out of 1,000 pounds at 184.75. And that's your feeder flash for Friday.